face on it, so I'm very appreciative of the invitation. Today I'm talking about tourism, and what I'm going to be doing is talking about some of the opportunities that tourism can present for emerging economies. It's often not a topic that you might hear a lot about, but tourism is a significant part of the economy, and it's going to be growing for emerging economies, particularly Asia Pacific. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, and that provides some opportunities for small and medium and micro businesses. Now, I'll talk as well, there is a changing trend towards alternative forms of tourism. That provides some extra opportunities for community development through tourism. So I'll talk a little bit about those opportunities, then I'll talk about some of the challenges around grasping those opportunities, and I'll talk about a couple of projects that are going on at the moment to try to deal with these challenges, which are really about getting the businesses ready to offer tourism, developing skills and competencies within small and micro businesses. So just as a starting point, I thought I'd better talk a little bit about tourism and its growth, and you can see just from the chart how quickly tourism is growing worldwide. Just as an example, can you raise your hand if you had an international trip last year, 2013? Raise your hand if you had an international trip. May have been for business, for pleasure, maybe visiting relatives that you didn't really want to visit. Yeah, keep your hand up. Okay, congratulations. You were one of 1 billion tourist arrivals worldwide. So last year, 1 billion tourist arrivals. So quite an amazing growth. And you can see from the chart that Asia Pacific is increasing its market share, and that will grow into the next decade or two. So great potential opportunities for businesses and for communities to take advantage of tourism. Just some statistics, and I won't bore you too much, but you can see it's an economically important industry. It's going to be increasing its importance. 1 in 11 jobs, around 9% of GDP, and about 29% of service exports are tourism related. And we've heard today about SMEs, or small and medium enterprises. When I'm thinking about tourism, I'm actually thinking about small and micro enterprises. So some of the challenges we'll come to in a moment, when you begin to think about what they may be from a micro business point of view. And about 80 or 90% of tourism businesses are actually small and micro businesses. They're not your 5-star hotels like we're sitting in today. They're small entrepreneurs and small enterprises. Just one more chart to show you the significance of tourism. And again, particularly Asia Pacific. So around a quarter of international tourist arrivals are to Asia Pacific, but nearly a third of all receipts or a third of all expenditures are in the Asia Pacific area. So right now, there's significant opportunities around tourism and tourism opportunities for Asia Pacific. Just another slide before I go into some other examples. There's only a couple of points here on the slide. There's lots of statistics, but I just want to draw your attention to the trend. The top right-hand side, what we're going to see by 2030 is a change of market share for tourism, away from advanced economies to emerging economies. So in 2030, I think the slide shows around 53% of arrivals will be in emerging economies, as opposed to in 2010, it was 47%. So a growth to emerging economies. And then as you see from the other circle here, a growing market share from Asia Pacific and a decline in Europe and the Americas. So we're seeing a shift in tourism to the Asia Pacific, and we're going to be seeing a shift to emerging economies. So perhaps there's some opportunities for tourism enterprises in this part of the world. I guess the question is, to what extent can these opportunities help alleviate poverty and some of the social and economic problems in Asia Pacific? And certainly there are a number of government agencies and national governments and UN agencies that see the potential of tourism to address some of the Millennium Development Goals and hopefully contribute to alleviating poverty. And partly it's because of the nature of tourism. I said before, many micro and small business enterprises. Tourism is very labour intensive, and it has good linkages to other industry sectors. You think about travelling to a hotel, you've got to eat food, so it has connections back to agriculture, fisheries. If you're buying a souvenir as a tourist, it obviously has connections to manufacturing or handicraft industries. So often it's looked at favourably because it has those linkages. It also can provide infrastructure, which can also benefit other industries. So transport infrastructure, road infrastructure, that's needed for tourism, but it's also very helpful for agriculture and getting produce to market. So by having new roads or transport infrastructure, it opens up other market opportunities for other industries. And it can provide facilities and amenities that local people can use to enhance their quality of life. And I'm thinking about cultural attractions and these kinds of things. This is probably less likely to occur with this type of tourism at the front here, which is, you look at this and it's mainly a beach, sort of an all-inclusive holiday. Benefits do accrue to local communities, but I think there are changes towards more alternative forms of tourism, more community-based tourism developments which have a lot more potential for alleviating poverty. And I'll give you some examples of this in a moment. So it's less likely to occur if a tourist is sitting on the beach than it is if they're out there spending their money in the local community. So a couple of opportunities, just broadly, 40% of tourism is to developing countries I should say, and it provides 3 times the amount of overseas development assistance. So out of 46, out of 49 of the poorest nations, it's the primary source of foreign exchange. So it's very important. As I said, there's an increased awareness of tourism by stakeholders, UN agencies, United Nations Development Programme, the Environment Programme, UNEP. They see the potential for tourism to conserve environmental resources, help develop communities and so forth. There's terms called PPT or pro-poor tourism. It's becoming popular. And STEP, sustainable tourism for the elimination of poverty. So these are being talked about at international and national levels and have potential for emerging economies, particularly in the Asia Pacific. Tourism can help diversify and transition the economy, perhaps from our primary production to services economy. There's low barriers of entry for entrepreneurs to enter into tourism, and I'll come back to this point later. That provides a challenge. There's low barriers of entry. That can create problems in terms of standards, competency of the operators and so forth. The majority of people employed in tourism are female, are women, and can also help provide jobs for minority groups. So it can help in that respect. It can help with declining industries, shifting from agriculture, as I said before, perhaps to service sector. And there's a number of good examples of where farmers have transitioned into homestays, providing homestay accommodation for tourists. Places are able to use their unique social, cultural and environmental resources to have a comparative advantage, and hopefully if they can leverage that, they may get a competitive advantage, attracting tourists. Think about emerging economies in the Asia Pacific. They have a lot of unique assets, physical, cultural, environmental, which can be used for tourism. And in fact, tourists are looking for that unique culture, those unique environmental resources. I'll come to this in a moment. And we see a growth of what I would call niche products or experiences. Mass tourism will always exist, but there's a growing proportion of tourists who want a small-scale niche tourism experience, whether it's ecotourism, volunteer tourism. These are the kinds of things I'll mention in a moment. When we look at tourism and the value chain of tourism, we might think of transport and accommodation, but it's more than that. It's also these kinds of things: souvenir and handicraft shops, cookery schools, guest houses, not just hotels. And we're seeing quite a large growth in the area of homestays and bed and breakfast accommodation. Malaysia has launched a program, a national program of homestays, and that's really proving quite popular from a tourism point of view. People want to go and live in local people's houses and provides good revenue for local communities. This is really the way forward, I see it, and these types of experiences are growing. But it's a value chain. We can have accommodation, but we also need attractions and activities. And I'll come back to the challenges later, but collaboration across the value chain is very, very important. Very, very important. Tourists are not likely to come for one activity, or if they do, then they need accommodation. That collaboration across the value chain is very, very important. And that's a challenge, getting local people to work together to create products that bring in tourists. A couple of examples of where I see some growth. Ecotourism, tourism to natural environments, one of the fastest growing types of tourism. It's providing revenue, job creation, and in some respects it's stopping local people cutting down trees, to be quite honest. It's actually giving a financial incentive to preserve the environment, preserve the biodiversity. There's some good examples of community-based ecotourism. It's a bottom-up approach where communities are involved. And Indonesia's got several examples of this. Komodo Island is one, the Flores, Komodo Island and Tanjung Puting. Probably pronounced that wrong, but you see the photos there of tourists coming in, viewing the orangutans, and the money that tourism generates gets put into preserving the environment and protecting the orangutans. So that's growing. Volunteer tourism is growing too, where people are, well, there's partnerships between travel companies, non-government organisations and the local community. And this is really challenging mainstream tourism. So here's an example of a tour operator partnering with an NGO and the local community group to provide volunteer tourism experiences where people come and help protect the environment, help with local projects. So why is this happening? Well, tourists want more out of their holidays. It's not simply about getting a good suntan, it's becoming more about having a sense of purpose. People are curious about what's happening in local communities, they want to help, and there's some examples there. So volunteer tourism is very much about tourists providing their resources, whether it's financial, human resources, their talent, to do something constructive and meaningful in a community. So it might be building houses for local populations, it might be building schools, it might be taking part in conservation programs. And this is growing. And it also educates the tourists. They're finding out about local issues, local problems. And it's perhaps a more constructive form of tourism where tourists and locals are thought of in equal partnership, as opposed to other forms of tourism where the tourist is being served by the host community, and a bit of an imbalance of power relations. Here, they're on equal footing, and it's a constructive type of tourism. I'm not saying it's not without its problems and challenges, but certainly we're seeing a growth in volunteer tourism, and it has many advantages. You might be surprised that slum tourism is growing. Okay, this is quite controversial. Tourists going to look at the poverty. It's happening in South Africa, and Brazil, India, and you see there's a little sign here for slum tours. Come and visit India's biggest slum, and there's run by Reality Tours. And I guess there are moral and ethical issues around this. I did come across an example in Jakarta here, where there is a tour operator running tours to some of the slums, but it's being run by an NGO, and half of the money goes back into supporting initiatives in the local community. So it provides schooling and health to the local community through visits to slums. So this is another type of tourism. It's quite controversial, but NGOs are getting involved in this. So that's some opportunities around tourism and its growth. What are some of the challenges? Well, some of the flow-on benefits from tourism can be limited, particularly if it's more of a mass market type of product. The large suppliers dominate the market, and the They might be foreign owned, so there's a lot of leakages outside of the local community. I guess that's why some of these alternative forms of tourism are being developed. Some of the challenges for tourism SMEs, they're not different to any other type of enterprise, but I think they're more challenging and more pronounced because of the nature of tourism. Micro enterprises, much smaller operators, very limited access to finance. Their financial literacy might be quite poor. They might not understand budgeting. They might not have access to capital, microfinance and so forth. They might not understand the consumer markets, the tourist markets and the potential. They might not have entrepreneurial management skills. And they might also lack information and really not have good standards, both from a health and safety point of view, and also in terms of what tourists expect. And tourist expectations are growing. So there are some skills and competencies that need to be developed to help these enterprises take advantage of some of the opportunities that I mentioned before. And also we've got to think too that sometimes people getting involved in tourism are transitioning from other sectors, from farming, forestry, fishing. And sometimes there's a reason why people choose to be farmers. Okay? They don't like people. Yeah, they get on better with animals than people. So transitioning into tourism, they have to understand it's a people industry and they have to develop good people skills, service standards and so forth. So sometimes it's a challenge because people are transitioning into tourism. So they might not have that understanding of tourism, the fact that they have to work collaboratively as well across the value chain, because together they're able to package up something unique that tourists will come to and experience and pay for, rather than as an individual. The tourist might not come, but with a package of activities across the value chain, that might be more likely. Long-term investment is really important to encourage pro-port tourism. Governments, NGOs and aid agencies are working together in the tourism area. This is just an example. Of the last 10 or 15 years, the number of agencies or NGOs involved in tourism projects. There's one now that we're involved with at the university. It's an ABD project looking at tourism competitiveness in the Philippines. It's a $4.5 million project over 4 years. 3 aspects to it. One is about raising standards, service standards, and hopefully moving to a quality assurance scheme. This is one of the ways to tackle this issue I mentioned before about compliance and standards. Another one is reducing regulations to try to encourage investment into tourism. The third one is grants for businesses to expand their training and capacity building. So that's the 3 aspects related to the ABD project in the Philippines. So that's quite important, that capacity building, that training, so that they develop those skills and competencies and an understanding of the tourism market and how to access that market. It might be quite different to what they've learned in another industry, for example. One example I just want to highlight too in this area is an ILO project, or the International Labour Organisation. They've got a small business competitiveness program, and they're focusing now on tourism. And this is quite encouraging. So they've done a lot of work in the area of vocational education and training to get that labour pool developed with skills in the tourism industry. They've done a lot of work with the national level with policy and ways that governments can develop tourism. So they've done all that, but what's missing is being the small businesses. You know, the small business operators who lack those entrepreneurial skills, who lack the managerial skills, who perhaps don't understand tourism. And so they've just recently launched this project here, focusing on the enterprise level, working across a number of different sectors, and trying to build those capabilities, build those skills, build that knowledge. They've actually started here in Indonesia. So their first projects were in Bali. They developed training guides, toolboxes, and really trying to improve that capacity of the local community. We're also doing work in Laos and in a number of other countries, but they've started here in Indonesia and Bali. What they're using is a community-based enterprise development model where they're actually getting local people to facilitate the workshops and the training. There's no consultants coming in. Okay, so it's low cost, using the locals, local knowledge, and because local people understand the context better than external consultants who fly in, do the training and go again. So this is interesting. We're working with the ILO to evaluate this program because it is a bit controversial, because it cuts out some of the external consultants, but it may have a better chance of success. So we're evaluating it with the ILO to see its success. And it's through a number of different sectors. This is just an example of the guest house one, small hotel. So look, just to summarise, look, I think tourism is growing. It will provide opportunities, there's no doubt about that, and the opportunities are squarely in the Asia Pacific, and particularly for emerging economies. Understanding tourist markets and products and developing service standards are really important. These are some of the challenges. There's also issues around financial literacy, developing entrepreneurial activity in the tourism area. These are some of the challenges. And what's also needed is partnerships. And I think alternative forms of tourism, community-based tourism, is allowing these partnerships to develop. We're seeing partnerships between the industry, NGOs and the local community. And so if that kind of activity keeps going, then I think there's a lot of potential for capturing some of the benefits that tourism can present and provide to emerging economies. So thanks for listening. Hopefully there's not too much news out of the presidential issue. Do we have a result? It's postponed, okay. So we're not stuck here this afternoon together. We can leave later, so that's great. So thank you for your attention.